Welcome, dear viewers, to another exciting and spiritually enriching episode. I am filled with joy as we come together once again on this journey to explore the profound wisdom of the scriptures and discover how they speak to us today in ways that are deeply relevant. Together, we will unravel the mysteries of Exodus 12, Matthew 26, Mark 14, and 1 Corinthians 5, seeing how these sacred texts offer guidance, clarity, and empowerment for our modern lives. Today, we will dive into these key biblical chapters, connecting the Old and New Testaments in a way that brings them alive in our hearts, and will relate them to the challenges and opportunities we face in our current world. As we explore the rich symbolism of the Passover in Exodus, the Last Supper in the Gospels, and Paul's exhortation to the Corinthians, we'll see a continuous thread of divine wisdom woven through each story. So, sit back, open your heart, and let the spirit of understanding flow as we embark on this incredible journey together. In Exodus 12, we encounter one of the most powerful moments in the story of the Israelites, the Passover. The Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, oppressed by Pharaoh, but God was preparing a way for their deliverance. The Passover is the moment where God gives Moses the command to instruct the Israelites to mark their doorposts with the blood of a lamb. That night, the Lord will pass through Egypt, striking down the firstborns, but sparing the houses marked by the blood. This event symbolizes not only God's power over human authorities but also His profound love and care for His people. The blood of the lamb represents protection, freedom, and the promise of a new beginning. For the Israelites, it was the final act that led to their liberation from slavery. We all face our own Egypts in life, those places of confinement, fear, oppression, or even personal limitations. The Passover reminds us that God always prepares a way for deliverance. When we find ourselves feeling stuck or enslaved by circumstances, whether financial, emotional, or spiritual, we can trust that God's timing and provision are perfect. The blood on the doorpost can be seen as a symbol of divine protection that extends to us today, offering safety and guidance through life's uncertainties. In the current world, many people feel enslaved by debt, fear, political strife, and economic inequality. But just as God delivered the Israelites, He offers liberation through His grace and through acts of faith. By aligning ourselves with His will and trusting His timing, we can overcome the challenges that face us. The Passover is a call to prepare, to have faith, and to step forward when God opens the door to freedom. As we transition to the New Testament, Matthew 26 and Mark 14 recount the Last Supper, a deeply significant event where Jesus shares a meal with His disciples before His crucifixion. This is the Passover meal, but Jesus infuses it with new meaning. As they eat the bread and drink the wine, He tells them that the bread is His body and the wine is His blood, shed for the forgiveness of sins. In this moment, Jesus transforms the traditional Passover into a new covenant. Just as the blood of the lamb protected the Israelites, the blood of Christ now serves as the ultimate sacrifice for all humanity, offering protection and redemption from sin. Jesus knew what was coming, but He approached it with both grace and purpose, showing that true freedom often comes through sacrifice. The Last Supper teaches us about covenant and sacrifice. In our world, we often seek freedom without understanding the cost. Many people want to be liberated from their problems without confronting the deeper issues in their lives. Jesus reminds us that true liberation comes through a willingness to surrender, to offer up parts of ourselves in order to be transformed. Right now, the world is grappling with the aftereffects of the pandemic, conflicts, and widespread uncertainty. Many feel burdened by loss, suffering, and insecurity. The Last Supper invites us to remember that no matter the external circumstances, we are part of a divine covenant that offers hope, peace, and eternal salvation. Jesus' sacrifice wasn't just a historical event, it's an ongoing invitation for us to participate in a life of purpose, service, and ultimate freedom. In a world that often teaches selfishness and individualism, this passage shows us that the path to spiritual prosperity involves a willingness to serve others, to lay down our lives, and to take up the cross of love, justice, and compassion. In 1 Corinthians 5, Paul addresses a different but equally important issue, the purity of the community. Paul speaks of a case of immorality within the church and urges the Corinthians to cleanse out the old leaven that you may be a new lump. He compares sin within the community to leaven, which can spread and corrupt if left unchecked. This passage calls for the church to be vigilant in maintaining its purity and to avoid tolerating behaviors that contradict the principles of the faith. Paul ties this teaching directly to the Passover. Just as the Israelites were to eat unleavened bread during the Passover, representing a break from their old life in Egypt, Christians are called to live in purity, breaking away from the sinful influences of the world. Paul's message to the Corinthians is incredibly applicable to our current societal and personal situations. We live in a world where moral boundaries are often blurred, and many communities tolerate behaviors and attitudes that are damaging to the collective soul. Whether it's within our personal lives, families, workplaces, or societies, we are called to be mindful of the leaven that can corrupt our hearts and minds. The current world is filled with distractions, temptations, and moral compromises. From social media influences that promote greed, envy, and comparison, to political systems that encourage division and corruption, it's easy for the old leaven to creep into our lives unnoticed. Paul's message challenges us to stand firm in our values and to create communities, whether in our homes, workplaces, or places of worship, that reflect the purity and love of Christ. This doesn't mean we are to judge or condemn others harshly, but rather to encourage each other in love to live out our highest calling, to be a light in a dark world, and to maintain the integrity of our faith even when it's difficult. If we look at these passages together, Exodus 12, Matthew 26, Mark 14, and 1 Corinthians 5, we see a common thread of freedom, sacrifice, and purity. The story of Passover is one of liberation from bondage, but it required the sacrifice of a lamb. The Last Supper reinterprets this, showing that true freedom comes through the ultimate sacrifice of Christ. Paul's letter reminds us that with freedom comes responsibility. We must actively cleanse our hearts and communities to maintain the purity of the new life we've been given. In the modern world, we are constantly seeking freedom from stress, financial worries, political unrest, and emotional burdens. But these passages remind us that freedom is not without cost. It often requires sacrifice, whether it's the sacrifice of our ego, our comforts, or even our old ways of thinking. They also teach us the importance of purity, not just in a moral sense but in maintaining a heart that is aligned with truth, love, and integrity. As we navigate the complexities of today's world, these passages call us to live with a spirit of discernment, to identify the leaven in our lives that can corrupt our freedom and joy, and to be willing to make the necessary sacrifices to walk in the fullness of God's promise. As we close today's message, I encourage you to reflect on the lessons from these powerful scriptures. Where do you need freedom in your life? What sacrifices are you being called to make? And how can you maintain the purity of your heart and soul in a world filled with distractions? The Passover reminds us that God is always working behind the scenes, preparing a way for our deliverance. The Last Supper teaches us that true freedom often comes through the ultimate sacrifice, Jesus giving his life for us. And Paul's exhortation in 1 Corinthians reminds us that with freedom comes responsibility. Let us embrace these teachings not just as stories from the past, but as living truths that can guide us in every situation we face today. Stay blessed, then remember, you are part of a divine story, a covenant of love and freedom that has the power to transform your life and the world around you.